1, 2, 3, 4. And hello. Welcome everybody to the inaugural Punk for Life podcast. I'm your host, Foz Rotten. I'm going to be here with you every week, bringing you the latest in punk rock news, old punk rock stories, interviews with people in the punk scene for years, new people in the punk scene telling us how they feel about it today. Anything to do with punk rock, you are here for it. This is going to be the podcast for it. Originally, I was going to call this the Punk Rock Save My Life podcast, but that was actually already taken. So we didn't do that. But today, we are going to proudly bring you the Punk for Life podcast. Because it's not just about punk rock saving our lives. It saved all our lives. It's about we are punk rock for life. And do or die, that is who we are. We cannot be around it. No matter what your job is, no matter where you are in your life, we're going to be old punks and then we're going to die. And that's it. But we've had a long adventure. We've had a great life in the punk rock scene. You know, we've got crazy stories. We've got scary stories. We've got fun stories. We've got all kinds of awesome stories to tell you here. Not just for me, but people I bring on as well. I cannot wait to deep dive with all these great people that I know throughout these years of being in the punk scene to bring these awesome stories to you. First off, let's do a little business. Again, I'm your host, Foz Rotten. Some people might know me as Aaron White, but, you know, for years and years in the scene, I've been known as Foz. And here's a little secret that not many people ever really got. Think about it. Foz Rotten? Oz Rotten? Yeah, when I was trying to come up with my cool punk rock name, that's definitely where it came from. You know, I always wanted to do Foz Rotten button and the Oz Rotten logo. You know, only a handful of people has ever really gotten that and said it to me if they have gotten it. Maybe they had and just didn't say anything, and I was over here thinking I was cool. But anyways, welcome to the first ever podcast. Today, I just want to do an introduction, tell you a bit about myself for those who don't know me. And for those who do know me, kind of do a deep dive and a backtrack. My name, like I said, is Foz Rotten. I've said that like 3 times now, all right? And you can find me on all my socials at Foz Rotten. And you can also find this page, this show, on all the pages at Punk for Life Pod. Got those up and going now as well. You can find me doing everything from YouTubes to, you know, I got a TikTok even like the kids do nowadays. But I mostly hang around Instagram and Twitter, and occasionally the Facebook is still up there. So, yeah, whatever your social media of choice, you can always find me at Foz Rotten. You can find the show at Punk Rock Pod. Okay, so today, like I said, I just want to get into the deep dive nitty gritty of who I am and who you'll be listening to over this series. The first time I ever remember seeing punk rock, I was probably a kid, no older than when Alf was still on and not in reruns on syndication. I remember punk rock on TV. I remember the Chips episode of Punk Rock. I remember the Mama's Family episode with the punk rockers. To me, punk rock was a thing, just like heavy metal, headbanging, thrashing, skateboarders, all that, you know, was in our world. New wavers, all that, it was just rock and roll. But punk rock very specifically stuck out to me not knowing anything about it, what it was. Who are these punks in Crocodile Dundee 2? You know, marching down the street, listening to Iggy Pop. Who is Iggy Pop? I don't know these things, but I tell you this much, it captivated me so much that the name punk stayed with me throughout my life. You can look back at old RoboCop comics. You know, look at the movies RoboCop, especially Part 2 and Part 3. And you got all these Hollywood punks, as we call them. You know, people that just threw on a fake mohawk. You know, it's so funny to look back and think of like Dan Aykroyd in Dragnet and his fake mohawk and everything, trying to blend in and quote unquote be punk. 21 Jump Street, the first episode, right out the gate, they're teaching Johnny Depp not just how to be cool, young, and hip, they're teaching him how to be punk rock. The last episode of season 1 is a full-on TSOL style punk rock fueled nightmare. And I'm here for it. I was here for all of it. I love it. So to me, originally learning what punk rock was, it wasn't so much the music, it wasn't the family, it wasn't the heart, it wasn't everything that keeps you into it and draws you to it. It was really a style, and it was just this overall thing of like, ooh, what is punk rock? This is new, this is different. And I'm here today to tell you exactly how I got into it. Let's go back to the early 90s. Grunge was king. Hair metal was kind of dead. Guns N' Roses was still big, but really, if you weren't Guns N' Roses, and if you want to consider them hair metal, which some people don't, you were out of luck. Grunge had destroyed everything by '92. By '93, you couldn't sell an album, to the cool kids if you were once a hair metal band in the '80s. Now it was all grunge. And what is grunge? Grunge, as I always understood it and loved it, I was a little grunge kid at first, so it all plays into this, is just punk and metal combined into a more sludgy, slowed down version of punk. Um, what was it Nirvana always said? It's Black Sabbath and Black Flag mixed together, or just later Black Flag albums said that. So in the zeitgeist of the '90s, grunge was everything, and through that, you start learning punk bands. You start learning old legendary punk bands like the Ramones and the Sex Pistols. You start learning even like the Circle Jerks got like a big break and were on MTV when grunge was big and they were trying to scoop up all the punk bands, the older punk bands, the newer punk bands, and be like, there's something to this alternative thing. It doesn't even just have to be from Seattle. It doesn't even have to have flannel shirts with it. It could just be loud, raucous rock and roll. And so they started scooping up all these punk bands the major label did, and even like the smaller labels. And through that, you started getting more and more punk to the mainstream. Um, I always like to say that 1994 is the year punk broke. I know I'm not the only one that's ever said that. I've seen that before. There is a documentary out called 1993, the year punk broke, about Nirvana and Sonic Youth and all that. But really, let's look and center this in 1994. I was born in 1983. So 11-year-old me, hearing Green Day on the radio, hearing Offspring on the radio, within a year you're hearing Rancid on the radio, later on you're hearing My Boss Tones on the radio. These were our mainstream hits of the mid 90s. These were guys who had been in punk bands since the 80s. These were guys who were in the punk scene. They were the punk scene, and now they were becoming the almighty mainstream. Okay, and some people, yeah, especially back in the day, want to be like, oh, sell out, sell out. But you know what? To a little kid, 11-year-old kid in West Virginia, West by God, Virginia, middle of nowhere, it meant everything to me to hear this on the radio, and I connected immediately. What are these awesome 3 minutes or less punk songs that are so catchy, so hooky? They remind me of the Beach Boys. I grew up, my first cassette tape was the Beach Boys. That's what I like, and I liked metal, I liked rock and roll, I liked grunge, but this was something different. This was something that I just latched onto and rolled with. My cassette tape collection could not, compete, all of it compete to just Dookie by Green Day. For me, whenever that came out, that was everything. And then through buying that, through buying the Offspring Smash album, I started looking at other cassette tapes. I ended up buying the Rancid and Outcome, the Wolves cassette tape. And then I stumbled upon a little cassette tape called Punk-O-Rama. Not even Volume 1, because Punk-O-Rama Volume 2 wasn't out yet. A green cassette tape that was called Punk-O-Rama. And it was by some label named Epitaph. And I was like, my God, what is this? And that's when you learn everything. That's when you learn what will become the 90s punk scene. That is Bad Religion, that is NoFX, that is Pennywise. Not to mention, like I already talked about, Rancid and the Offspring's on there. And, you just have so many killer bands on that first album that by the time the second album ever came out, the second Punk-O-Rama Volume 2 came out, and I got that on CD, I was head deep, head first into this. You start deep diving. And back in those days, you didn't have the internet. At least we didn't. 1995, 1996, you did not have the internet at home, buddy. You know how you discovered new bands? What was Kurt Cobain wearing on his t-shirt? What was Billy Joe Armstrong wearing on his t-shirt? What's Trey Cool wearing on that t-shirt? Oh, Tim Armstrong, what's he got spray painted on his jacket? That is how you found out punk bands. You looked at the liner notes, see who they thanked. You read little blurbs and what you could find in Rolling Stone and Hit Parader and Circus and Spin, and you would just put two and two together, like, oh, that band liked this band, and a member was from that band, and that's how you find that out. And then, if you're lucky enough, you have a record store near you that you could regularly get albums and keep getting albums. Now, back in the day here in Logan, we had a place called On Cue. Up in Wimpson, there was a place about 40 minutes away or so at a mall called Disc Jockey. And some people are going to hear these names like, oh, Disc Jockey. Yeah, I remember Disc Jockey. That's ancient history to kids these days. They do not know what a disc jockey is. You would go in there and buy your VHSs, your cassette tapes, your CDs, and that is where you found everything. And Disc Jockey is where I found that Punk-O-Rama Volume 1. My grandfather took me shopping for my birthday. I just had some birthday money, and he let me pick out whatever I wanted. He wasn't paying no attention anyways. And I get that cassette tape, and it changed my life. I dove deep looking into what punk rock actually was. And at the time, I remember there was a PBS documentary about the history of punk. Well, it was like the history of rock and roll, and it was the special punk episode. And I watched that on PBS, and I went and bought the outrageously priced one VHS in the collection of that. And it's the history of rock and roll punk. I bought that VHS, and I went home and I studied that sucker like it was the Bible. I learned all the ins and outs. And then I thought I was Joe Cool. I thought I was somebody then. But then I started discovering all these new bands, mostly from M2. I'll give MTV credit. MTV at the time, it wasn't the best, but you can look back nostalgically on it now. But when they first launched M2 in the mid 90s, that is whenever some cool shit really was on there. I found MXPX on there. I'm pretty sure I saw Voodoo Glow Skulls on there. Now, I tell you the first time I ever found Rancid, that was on the Canadian channel Much Music that we would get sometimes. It wasn't even all the time. It was just like these blocks that we would get. And Time Bomb by Rancid was the first time I ever heard Rancid, the first time I ever heard anything like that, and it blew me away. Soon after that, I got the Punk-O-Rama Volume 1 I just talked about, and I was on my way, man. After that, all the bands came. And then I got into the real nitty gritty of what would become my favorite bands: Minor Threat, Black Flag, 7 Seconds. All these bands then just started coming to me. I found out the Misfits were actually a band and not just a cool skull that Metallica wore. I found all this stuff, and I was just in a world of discovery. So let's cut to, I was about 14 in 1997 ish. Okay. I run into one of my best friends still to this day at a freaking bowling alley because he was wearing a NoFX shirt and I was wearing an MXPX shirt. And we walked up to each other, never had met before. I was like, hey man, cool shirt. And that's how you did it back in the day. That is how you made friends. That's how you found your peers. That's how you found people. You walk into a strange place with strangers everywhere, you zone in on the one person wearing a Dead Kennedy shirt, buddy, you have a new friend for life. You got your first bandmate. You got the guy that you shared a joint with outside the show and got busted with. You have stories for life to tell. Okay. And that's how you found people back then, just the shirts that they wore, or, if they were super cool, they had buttons on their jackets or whatever. But I still remember that so clearly. And I'm still like that today. I'll walk by somebody with a cool ass punk band shirt or horror movie shirt on. I'm like, hey dude, love that shirt. Where'd you get that? And it happens to me as well. And it's still, especially, for people who are a little bit older than the teenagers in the early 20 somethings nowadays, where it's so easy just to look up everything online and have it at your fingertips. That is how you discovered people who would be your friends and become your scene that you were within. Okay, so now you're in high school, and But actually, for me, it was the summer between junior high and high school. Now you found your people. You found your handful of friends who are there with you, and you're all discovering punk. You're trading tapes to dub over to each other. You know, oh man, I got this Misfits. Can I get a copy of? Can I get a copy of that Groovy Ghoulies? You know, and that's how it went. And then you looked in the back of the Groovy Ghoulies, who you had heard of through Lookout Records from one of the old Green Day albums, and then in there you find Pansy Division. In there you find, oh, what's this, Operation Ivy? Wait, Operation Ivy? Aren't those the guys from Rancid? Oh my God, this album's amazing. And then all of a sudden you go down the rabbit hole and you just deep dive into everything. And even better than that, you are starting your first bands. I remember my first band was, like I said, between 8th and ninth grade. I had this crazy deranged idea. I could play drums, still can't play a beat, but it was fun nonetheless to get a group of guys in there. Some of them actually went off and did stuff. They could play guitar really well, and they went to be in real bands, you know, while me and the bass player sitting over there trying to figure out how to maintain a rhythm, maintain a beat. But you know, you learn your first Screeching Weasel song, you learn your first Offspring song. Uh, you scrap together a basic sounding original song that's just a complete rip off travesty of another punk song. And you have fun, and that's how you get into the scene. Your band gets its first show. You start going to other people's shows and beg to get on that show. You find the life that's already there and you join it with a passion. I'm like, please God, let me join this scene, let me join this life, let me join this world. And that is how you form the bonds that will go with you forever, at least for me. And I know so many other people that's how it was. Okay, so that's a little bit of my past life history. And then all through high school, you know, you're in and out of high school bands, you're going around, you're throwing shows. We did all ages shows almost every weekend, at least once a month. You find a, you know, a old broken down building, a rec center. Our thing around here was there was a lot of old gyms that you could rent out for like $100 a night, and then we started booking bands a lot from tooth and nail at the time. We had the Huntingtons, we had oh, let's see, y'all. We had Jersey, we had Autopilot Off. Uh, there was a lot of bands. Hangnail came down here. Huntingtons were here 3 times. And then, you know, you start getting weird bands. We even had like Captured by Robots one time. If you don't know who they are, look them up. That was some insane stuff right there. But yeah, you're bringing in bands from your surrounding area that you've never seen before, like the ska band that lives 6 hours away that you've only heard about. You know, and this is your first time meeting them, and they're going to crash at your house that night. You know, if it's really cool, and important people with riders, they want a hotel for the night. You're trying to scrape up change, you know, to get them their hotel for the night. But your mom's cooking them spaghetti dinners to be in the back to meet their riders with. You know, you're underage. You don't know what you're doing, but you just know that you want to be part of this world. And then if you were lucky enough to get in a band that sticks, by that time, 18 to 21 age, you're going around and you're seeing the world. Um, for me personally, I was a little bit of a late bloomer with getting out there and traveling around with shows. I was all about the shows, local shows here in our general West Virginia area. And I traveled with my friends' bands all around. But it wasn't until later on that I would have, you know, some music rumblings that I could travel with. We'll get to that later. The first time I remember ever going out of town to see another show was besides Warped Tour, and we'll get to that. That's a whole other story. I would be roadieing with my friend's band out of nowhere, and we would just travel around. They would travel forever. They'd open for bands that would eventually become way bigger, like Plain White Tees, you know, Hatebreed, Comeback Kid. You know, this is all very early 2000 stuff. But to Real Big Fish, and to us, they were rock stars. You know, the band that I was with, to me, they were rock stars. They were living on the road. They were doing it. I was setting up the merch table with them. It was just everything to me to even be involved with it. Um, Now, Warped Tour, that is a whole other episode we're going to be doing. That's a series of episodes that I plan on doing. It's not just, oh yeah, I went to Warped Tour a couple times. No, I went to every Warped Tour from 1998 to 2004. And then I took a couple years off. I went 2007. And unfortunately, I never got to go back. No matter how many times I tried, there was always something popping up. But there was a good long period where I lived my life year by year of definitely all through high school. Okay, how do we get to Warped Tour this year? How do we make Warped Tour happen? I'm going. And that's how you see all kinds of bands during that time. I saw hundreds of bands, and it just boggles my mind when I look back and actually think about what bands I did see, how many times I saw them. And that was all thanks to Warped Tour coming to a nearby state, getting a group of friends, hopping in the car, and driving. So at some point in my early 20s, after years of trying, and have actually had in high school a pretty cool Beastie Boys style comical hip hop group called 3FDA, Three Fat Dudes with Attitude, that we had some local success. People dug our style. I was like, okay, it's time to really start my first real punk band. And I was good friends with the band The Big Bad, who had recently broken up after recording their first album. And I got with some of the guys from that band, and they're like, "Hey, Foz, you want to sing in a punk band?" It was like the skies parted. For me, it was everything. We wrote a handful of new songs. We did a couple covers. I remember we did "Cool Kids" by Screeching Weasel, which ironically was also one of the first songs I ever learned on drums back in like the summer between 8th and ninth grade. Okay, so we went through so many names before we ever did a show, but the one we finally ended up with was Bloody Stump and the High Heeled Pumps. I still couldn't tell you where we got it. Chris George, our bass player, shout out to Chris, came up with it randomly, and we just all went with it. Like, yeah, that sounds cool. We were very raw. We wanted to be the unseen, but maybe a little more melodic. And that was like the big thing. Like Rise Against was just coming out, so I was like, if I could mix Rise Against with the unseen, this would be the band. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any recordings of it anywhere. We played a handful of live shows, and that was that. But on to the next one. We started a new group, me and a couple of the guys from it with a couple other guys, called Abomination. Now, there's a deep buried recording of a couple of songs from that will probably never ever see the light of day. I don't know what we were doing with that band. That was the first time I tried putting my rap style, which I'll get to that in a second, with the punk rock. But this was like more slow style, so it was just a mess. But I loved it. We had a lot of fun. Shout out to all those guys. I don't think we ever even played a show, but we got recording. Isn't that the way it goes? You play shows with a band that you never record with, and you record with a band that you never play a show with. So now cut to, I love hip hop. All my life I love hip hop. This could very easily be a hip hop show. But punk rock has always been my heart, while hip hop is my art, and I love it. Um, the the weird thing for me was starting to discover that you just like in the punk scene, there was an underground hip hop scene. And you find these underground rappers the same way that you do the underground punk bands, through compilations, through seeing them pop up on Warped Tour. It was this whole new world opened up to me. It's like, I love old school hip hop, but I don't necessarily navigate to what was on the radio then. But then you find all these great acts like Atmosphere that, did stuff with Epitaph, and through them, POS and all the Doomtree Collective. Nowadays we have Run the Jewels that are top of the charts, but those guys were back in the underground scene back in the day whenever I was the first listening to it. Um, and so I started rapping under the name Foz Rotten. And you know what? I'm a damn good rapper. I have no reason to ever be like, oh yeah, I rap on something. No, dude, I'm a fucking good rapper. And I love doing it. I still record songs. Most recently, the song Boom Bap was a pretty big success for me. I love playing shows. But that's my whole other life. That's Foz Rotten, the rapper. I'm wanting to focus more on the punk rock life, which fueled over into the rap stuff. So I did Foz Rotten for a while. And then I decided I was going to want to start. I wanted to start basically the Violent Femmes meets indie rap. And me and some friends got together and we formed a band called Westerberg High. Now, this band was probably most definitely my most successful at that time. We traveled around, we played a lot of shows. That's when we did a lot of our traveling. That was the first time me going places with people and performing, not just riding with my friends and not just driving down the road and playing some songs with a group of friends. We were actually going to different states. We were on TV once and we recorded an album. Now, by the time we recorded the album, we pretty much broke up, so it never really came out, but you can still find that stuff online proudly. I know it's all on SoundCloud. Just look up Westerberg High. After Westerberg High ended, that's when I really went back to honing in on Foz Rotten as a solo act. That's when all the music you can find on Spotify, for the most part, came out. Whether it was me myself with different musicians, or actually had a band for a while called Foz Rotten and Dirty Scoundrels, which I love. We got our 10-year anniversary of our album Party On coming out back in 4/20, 2013, which is hard to think that was 10 years ago. That came out, and that was one of the most successful ventures I'd done up to that part as well. Everything I'd done kept going on itself bigger and bigger. And that's the whole thing. That's what you got to do, man. And it was still that punk rock ethos, this punk rock ethic, still playing the all ages shows, mixed with the bar shows, mixed with festivals. You want to always be going up while staying with your roots. And for me, everything I do is punk rock, whether it's rap, whether it's like a weird Clutch sounding, Red Hot Chili Pepper sounding band, it's still all punk rock for me. So after Foz Rotten and Dirty Scoundrels, um, I took a few years off and I went into I'd always been working, always been in the food industry, was in the pizza game for a long time. I kind of got more into the corporate world of that, into management and everything. And it took me a while to really learn how to balance the music life with my adult life. During that time that I wasn't playing with anybody, I got married. Uh, to the wonderful Brittany Fury at Furiously. I love you, baby. Shout out. She knows I'm doing this right now. She has been so supportive of of me getting back into the entertainment and music world. And I say entertainment by like doing videos, doing podcasts. We had a podcast for a while. And the main band that I really feel has been my favorite thing I've ever done came along at this time right after we got married. Really a little before we got married, but then we started doing all the shows and everything right after we got married. And that's a band called Boldly Go. Now, a lot of you probably know Boldly Go. We're a Star Trek themed punk band. Now, whether you want to call it a hardcore punk band, street punk band, pop punk band, we had all styles of punk rock in that band. We have an album out. You can still find it everywhere. It's out on Coffin Curse Records. And gosh, we traveled everywhere. Now, the pandemic hit right when we were starting. We started off in 2019 and we hit the ground running. And then the pandemic happened. We couldn't do anything for a number of months. And then as soon as the restrictions lifted, we went everywhere. The record was recorded during the pandemic, it was released, and then we were off to the races. And God, I love that band. Boldly Go, check us out. It's available everywhere. All the Foz Rotten stuff is available everywhere. Check all that stuff out. Now, for me, Boldly Go was a chance to be like, I'm in my 30s, but I still feel like I'm in my 20s, and I'm achieving my dreams of a teenager. And for me, that really showed me I'm in this for life. That is the point of this podcast. It is not just something you used to do as a kid, even if you don't play music anymore, even if you never played music at all. Maybe you had a zine. Maybe you were just helping with the shows, putting on the shows, grabbing gear for bands, roadieing for bands. Whatever it was, it doesn't matter that thing you did. You could still do it or not do it now. You are still 100% in the punk rock scene. I mean, with the internet now, we could be connected to a scene in Europe that we would never even get to go, but you could be friends with those bands. You could be involved. You could help advertise with them. It doesn't matter. It is a worldwide phenomenon now, and we are all linked together. For me personally, I love my area. I love West Virginia. I've had such a hard time in my years coming to that revelation that I love our area. But we are just it is what it is, and it's special. Um, the Appalachian area is not one of we support the arts. We really believe in you and your punk rock idea. No, you're fighting against all that, just like when we were teenagers. But it's the people that are in the scene, no matter what, even what genre you're in. That's why you get so many mixed bills. You get the metal band with a rapper, with a punk band, with the ska band, and half the time the same drummers in all those bands. Um, it's just it's a mix and match version of where, say you're in New York or California, you can have an all punk bill, you can have an all post punk bill. You can't do that here. You have to get three or four other bands that are all over the place musically, different from one to the other, but everyone's so genuinely happy and excited to be there. And this is how we build our scene. And the punk segment of our scene, especially, we're over there. I don't want to say we're leading the charge, but man, a lot of our ethos goes into the other scenes as well. And you could just see it happen. We'll go support the folk singer that's playing at the coffee shop. That's fucking punk rock, man. Because he's out there and he don't have to do that. He's just expected to wake up, go to the coal mines, take care of the family. But no, he's out there in the coffee shop playing, and that's punk rock. Just the same as us going up and playing at a bar, playing at an all ages show that we booked the gym venue for. It's all so punk rock. And even if they've never been like, oh, I'm not really into punk, they see what we do. They see the ethos, and it all spreads out, and it's all love. Okay, so I've been ranting and raving now for about a half hour, and I've probably repeated myself a dozen times. I apologize. Normally, I will have a certain topic or a certain person I'm interviewing, and they'll go a lot smoother. And right now, it's just me talking to a microphone, talking to you, this mystery audience. Maybe if I'm lucky, a couple people will listen. If I'm very lucky, a lot of people will listen. That's the goal. That's the hope. Even without my own band right now, because Bold Ego is currently on hiatus, I want to be part of this punk rock community that I am in and I love and I'm still a part of every day, but I want to contribute. So say this is like my audio zine. Okay, say this is my audio blog, whatever you want to call it. It's a podcast. Podcasts are a thing now. I've had different podcasts over the years. I love the art of podcasting. Now, I will also be posting this on YouTube, and in the future, I would really like, especially when I have guests, to do a video podcast so you could see us talking instead of just hearing us. But I will always do the audio as well, because for me personally, that's how I listen to podcasts. Is even if it's on YouTube, it's just through audio. I'll turn it on the phone, I'll sit it down. I have to drive a lot for my job, so I always listen to podcasts in the car. Um, it's just like someone's there with you. And now it's like the scene is with you wherever you go. So I'm going to wrap up, but before I go, I was like, for people that don't know me, know my taste, I'll give you a little backdrop here. I'm going to give you my top 10 all-time favorite punk bands. Now, of course, as everyone knows, this could change daily. You could ask me tomorrow. I'll probably have a couple of different picks. I have a lot of, secondary choices that could easily be first choices, like I said, in 10 hours from now. But as of right now, I'm going to give you my top 10 all time favorite punk bands. Not only that, I'm going to give you my favorite album by that band, because you could say that you like the Misfits, but then you're like, wait, which version of the Misfits do you like? You know? So here is my all time top 10. And I'm going to start with 10 and work up to number 1. So at number 10, I have Social Distortion, the album Somewhere Between Heaven and Hell from 1992. I had this sucker on cassette early on in high school, and I wore it the heck out. Okay, I also had, some other albums on CD. I loved them all, but this was the album I could never get enough of. Mike Ness gives us style. He gives us warmth. He gives us presence. You wish Mike Ness was your uncle who you could sit there and hear stories from. I love it. Social Distortion, number 10, Somewhere Between Heaven and Hell. All right, number 9. And this could be controversial that they're so low on my list. But honestly, I couldn't place them above the others in a stance of those others all have albums that mean more to me, have songs that mean more to me, or just the bands themselves mean more to me. But this is an all-time band that, is a desert island band for me. And that is number 9, NoFX. Now, usually everybody will choose Punk in Drublic. I really like some of the not necessarily the first albums, but some of the earlier stuff like White Trash, Two Heaps and a Bean. Um, and even later, a little bit later on when I was in high school, there's a very special album to me called "So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes," and that almost made my number one album count on here. And that would most definitely be my number 2. But my number 1 NoFX album is "The War on Errorism" from 2003. Now, that sucker hit, and it hit hard. That was during the George Bush is not my president t-shirt all over Warped Tour phase. Franco and American was the big hit right then. But besides that, that album is just so thick, top to bottom with hits. The Jealous Again song, I don't know if that's actually the name of the track. They got Two Jealous Agains, knew you were the one. That one. That is one of my all-time favorite songs. Whoops, I OD'd, 13 Stitches. I just love that album. Okay, that was NoFX and number 9 with War on Errorism. Number 8, these two bands go hand in hand for me. I learned about this band earlier on, and they've stuck with me forever. I've gotten to see NoFX a couple of times as well, but I've gotten to see Rancid at least 3 times, and that's who it is. It's Rancid at number 8. And of course, the album is And Out Come the Wolves from 1995. One of the albums that changed everything for me. This album is my youth. I love this album. Top to bottom, you can't beat it. Any bassist out there, and you want to be bassist, learn the bass lines on this record and you're a bassist. Okay, that's what we always told everybody who wanted to learn punk rock bass. Number 7. Now, most people wouldn't agree with this band being this high, I feel, because even though they've been around for decades, people probably still view them as a newer band. But for me, they've always held a special place, and they were one of my favorite bands in high school, still one of my favorite bands today. Have tickets to come up and see them soon with Flogger Molly, and that is Anti-Flag. And the album that was always special to me was A New Kind of Army from 1999. Now, they just released a new album, and while their sound has kind of changed over the years, they've still always stayed at their core the same band that they've always been, same values, same principles, love their fans, tore their hearts out, everything that you want in a band. And that was Anti-Flag at number 7 with A New Kind of Army from 1999. All right, now we're getting into the nitty gritty. We're going back old school with it. At number 6, Circle Jerks with their debut album Group Sex from 1980. Now, I'm not even sure that 4 years ago, I'm not even sure that Circle Jerks would have been in my top 10. But it was really the re-release from Trust Records that made an album I always owned, I always kind of liked, to where I loved. And then Circle Jerks went on a tour with my number 5 favorite group of all time and the greatest band I've ever seen live in my entire life of seeing bands, 7 Seconds. Their album, The Crew from 1984, is my choice, and it was also released through Trust Records recently. They both got beautiful variant vinyls. It's gorgeous. I love it. And they went on tour together. And I called up my best friend Verko, and I was like, Verko, we're going to live out our teenage dreams, and we're going to go see Circle Jerks, who we had never seen before, never thought we would, and rewatch 7 Seconds. For me personally, the first time I saw 7 Seconds at Warped Tour when I was a teenager is the greatest show of all time. It changed my entire life forever. It solidified everything that I believed in punk rock could be. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. That was my come to Jesus moment. I came to Kevin, and forever 7 Seconds will be that band for me. Ironically, whenever we went to Cleveland to see Circle Jerks and 7 Seconds with Negative Approach, also a cool band, 7 Seconds got COVID and had to drop off. So I didn't get to see them. It would have been my 3rd time seeing them, which I never thought I'd see them again anyways, because they had been broken up for a few years. But my God, I was so heartbroken. But Negative Approach really pulled it off as the second band, and they had a local band open. It was so cool. And then Circle Jerks just killed it for like an hour and a half nonstop, doing 100 songs. It was amazing. So 7 Seconds at number 5 with the Crew, and once again, number 6 was Circle Jerks with Group Sex. All right, so now we're into the top 4, and this is a band who I truly believe without them you wouldn't have modern punk. You definitely wouldn't have pop punk. You wouldn't even have Blink 182 to make all the pop punk bands now want to rip off Blink 182 because Blink 182 is just ripping them off, and that is The Descendants. Now, my pick could have easily been one of the early albums, but I have to go with my heart. And from top to bottom, one of my all-time top 5 albums of any genre is Everything Sucks from 1996. I remember seeing When I Get Old video on 120 Minutes of Matt Pinfield when I was 14, and it just blew me away. I immediately went out and bought this album. I've listened to, I wore that CD out. I bought another CD. I now own it on vinyl. I just, I listen to it on my Apple Music all the time. It has never not been in rotation in my life since 1996. It is everything to me. Everything sucks, but this album doesn't. Okay, there's a dad joke for you. Okay, so that was The Sense at number 4, and they are high and mighty on my I must see before I die list. I still have not seen The Descendants. I've never gotten to see anyone in my top 4, actually. Number 3, Minor Threat. Now, instead of just saying, like their album or their 7 inches, I'm just going to go with the complete discography, because let's be honest, that came out in 1989, and unless you were around back then, if you were a kid coming up, listening to the Epitaph bands, the Fat bands, that is how you found Minor Threat, was through the complete discography CD. I know for me, it definitely was. I remember me and my friend Sheldon I was talking about earlier exchanging 7 Seconds, Walk Together, Rock Together, and Minor Threat's complete discography. One person had on CD, so the other one would tape it, and then we'd swap that way. And Minor Threat, their complete discography is just, it's perfection. You cannot top that batch of songs. I still get pissed off and put on I'm Seeing Red, or just screaming at the top of my lungs with filler, after a hard day at work. Minor Threat is the same release to me now at almost 40 as it was whenever I was 14 years old. So Minor Threat's complete discography from 1989 at number 3. All right. Now, my number 1, my number 2 was so hard to pick that I almost want to say they're both the number 1. But if I really had to choose, I went ahead and put number 2, Black Flag. And instead of saying Damaged, where that would be so easy, I'm going to go the route that might be a little controversial and say The First 4 Years, which was put out in 83. But it's all the early 7 inches, and you could not beat it, man. What Henry say is the densest batch of jams that you have ever heard in your entire life since the Stooges. For me, it beats the Stooges. Black Flag are my gods. They are the Bible that you follow with Get in the Van. They are everything for me. I'm not a big tattoo guy, but I would still consider getting the Black Flag bars tattooed on me. Okay? I'm the guy who sits there at a restaurant taking ketchup packets and making the 4 bars and looking at his wife, 4 bars, and she just looks at me like I'm an idiot. But for me, it's like, 4 bars, Black Flag. Black Flag is, I can honestly legit say, my all-time favorite band. One of my all-time favorite bands, because I cannot do this list at all without naming what I have as my number 1 all-time favorite punk rock band, the Ramones. RAMONES, Ramones. And do you know how hard it was to try to come up with a number 1 favorite Ramones album? They went through decades of amazing albums, not just years, decades of amazing albums. And while I normally would honestly say Black Flag's my all-time favorite punk band, you can't deny the Ramones. I could say that they're it's like saying Steven Spielberg is your favorite all-time director, but no, you just leave him out of the conversation, and then you start talking about Tarantino and other people. Okay, but if you like them, I know a lot of people's going to go, I don't even like them. If you like them, to me, the Ramones are like that. They are so Mount Rushmore godlike, like the Beach Boys. For some people, the Beatles, not me. The Rolling Stones. To me, that is the Ramones. They are the icons of icons, the top tier, numero uno. You cannot even touch them, so you might as well not even put them on the list, band. But I put them on the damn list. So instead of doing my favorite Ramones album, I'm going to do my favorite Ramones album from each decade they were active. So from the 70s, I'm just going to start off with the 1976 self titled Ramones. Now, you can do any album from the 70s, honestly, and it's going to have the hits on there. But that first album, it's the blueprint. That is what punk rock is. Everything goes back to that first album. And it's fucking great. You listen to those songs, it's so raw, it's so quick, it's so short. It's basically what Circle Jerks looked at and went, yeah, okay, that's what we're doing. What 7 Seconds, what Minor Threat, what Black Flag, what every band did on my list. Looked at them and went, yeah, okay, we do that now. That is what music is. Forget everything before. This is what music is. The self-titled album from 1976 cannot not be on my list. Okay, that being said, I'm a huge 80s fan of the Ramones. Howling at the Moon, Sha-la-la-la. My favorite song is Pet Cemetery by the Ramones. That's like a number one, at least in my top five. I believe, honestly, probably my third favorite all-time song ever. If I was doing any genre list, I would say it's Pet Cemetery. But, on that same token, My Brain is Hanging Upside Down from the 80s is also in a top tier for me. I cannot not talk about the 80s. And again, any of those albums are stellar. But I'll go ahead and go with my favorite because it has my favorite song on there, Brain Drain from 1989, which featured Pet Cemetery as the last album with Dee Dee Ramone on it. And then he left during the touring and during the videos of that. He's in the freaking Pet Cemetery video, but then by the time you get to some later videos, they've now got CJ Ramone. And I love CJ just as much as Dee Dee. I mean, I think CJ is some of the best parts of the 90s version of the Ramones, and that's the way I'll segue into my favorite 90s album, their last album, Adios Amigos. Because you cannot listen to songs like The Crusher and tell me that that was not fucking awesome. CJ was an integral part of that band. And I love that he's out there doing solo stuff and out with Me First and Gimme Gimmes now. Fucking make him punk rock royalty just like anybody else. I don't want to hear none of this shit about CJ wasn't a real Ramone. He was one of the best Ramones. They were all one of the best Ramones. Put a Mount Rushmore up there of Ramones, and I'll go to it and pop a 10 up next to it. Okay, so self-titled 1976 for the 70s, Brain Drain 1989 for the 80s, and Adios Amigos from 1995. Those are my three Ramones records from each decade they were active. My God, that was the top 10 all-time punk rock list. Ramones, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Descendants, 7 Seconds, Circle Jerks, Anti-Flag, Rancid, NoFX, and Social Distortion. My God. Okay. Now that was fun. After all the ranting and everything, we actually got into something of a little substance that I hope you all really enjoyed. I hope you all really liked. And hopefully, that latter part will be a nice snapshot of what I have coming for whenever I do topics. I've already been thinking of, punks in movies, which I talked a little bit about, punks on TV, which I talked a little bit about, but really going in depth and them and how punk rock has been portrayed in the media since its beginning. I have so many ideas like that, and a ton of people I want to interview. I don't want to give anything away right now, but I got a few things lining up already. I've kind of hush been talking with people about, not just local people, people from uh, all around the United States, all around the world, different countries. I the internet has many splendid things and leads you so many different directions, and you meet so many great people. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Thank you guys for listening. I really meant to make this one shorter, but we're going to hit an hour, just like what I plan to do with the regular episodes to come. But this has been the introduction to the Punk for Life podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Foz Rotten. Please follow me at Foz Rotten on any social media of your choice. You can find the show Punk for Life. It's going to be on all the podcast streamers. At the time of this recording, I still haven't set up which distributor I'm going to use yet, but whichever one I will, this will be on everything, whether it's Apple Podcasts or it's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on Spotify. It's going to be everywhere, I promise you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Tune in for the next episode, which I'll go ahead and tell you, I've already got it lined out. Warped Tour Memories, 1998. Seattle, Washington, me at 14 years old, the bands I saw, the time I had, the stories to tell. It's insane. Okay, I'm Foz. This has been the Punk for Life podcast. See you next time. Peace.